Welcome to the Passionate Professional. I have to tell you, today is a very special day because I have a very special person who is going to blow you away. You talk about someone who's a passionate professional. Well, I've got one right in front of me. Palveshey is a quantum physicist who's turned consciousness become a consciousness coach. Palveshey helps the greatest leaders of all walks of life cultivate joy and fulfillment from within while balancing their external worlds by helping them rewrite their stories. And as you know, as a storyteller for career advancement, there's nothing like a good story. So I am ready, as I'm sure you are, to hear Palveshey's story. Welcome, Palveshey.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, you know, I'd love having you on. So, Palveshey, why don't you share with my audience a little bit about your story? Let's start there.
So about my story, and I'll start from the beginning because I feel that it's relevant to how I got to where I am. So I was born in New York, and when I was 8 months old, I was put up for adoption to family in Pakistan. And I lived there for the first 6 years of my life. And when I was 6 years old, my biological parents found me and brought me back to America. And that transition wasn't easy. I was disciplined in many ways as a child, and that was very different from what I grew up knowing. That did create a rift in our relationship, and ultimately I ended up running away from home, which led to being homeless for my entire senior year of high school. I was only 17 at the time, and I worked very, very hard to get a scholarship, but I ended up going to the University of Florida, where I triple majored in mathematics, political science, and linguistics. And once I was done with that, I got married to my best friend at the time. And quite honestly, I treated him the way I was treated. And we spread our ways. And I went on to pursue a dual master's in finance and software engineering at Harvard. Once I was done with that, I created a crypto hedge fund, which I ultimately ended up selling, and a blockchain think tank, which has recently been repurposed into a metaverse think tank. Once I was done with that, I pursued a doctorate in quantum physics. And by the end of it all, I finally had food in my belly and a roof over my head, and money in the bank. And I was so depressed that I attempted to kill myself twice. That finally I thought all of these things were these shiny objects on top of a hill that I was climbing. And once I finally got there, it didn't feel like what I thought it would feel like. In fact, it felt very empty. And it was around this time that I quit my job, I sold my house, I moved to a new city, and about a week after I moved, we went into lockdowns. The pandemic happened. And I had to say, while everyone was freaking out, I was not. I was like, finally, for the first time in my life, I don't feel guilty for not working because nobody is working. And that really gave me some time and space to reflect. And this was when I ultimately began meditating. And that meditation allowed me to really look at my life, dive deep within, and really figure out why I was doing what I was doing and pivot when necessary. And that process ultimately turned into a coaching program, which went so well that I ultimately ended up partnering with an international coaching firm and created my own private practice as well, where we implement psychedelics in order to help consciousness expand and transcend our traumas. And so that is what I do today. I give talks on consciousness and leadership and do consciousness coaching around transcending your traumas.
Oh my God, I love it. Tell me a little bit about the kind of clients that you get around the trauma. What are they doing? Who are your clients? And what do you help them specifically to do?
So now I will say that we all have experiences that to some degree become internalized as trauma, and those ultimately become our triggers that when pushed up against lead to these outbursts that we may not necessarily be proud of. The clients that I specifically focus with, most of my clientele are therapists, doctors, and executives. Because while we may hold these professions to a high standard as if, they should have everything figured out, I think it's important to remember that they are also human beings. And
Absolutely.
they also need support networks. And so I usually work with people in positions of leadership in order to help that impact trickle down.
That's wonderful. Can you give an example of a story of somebody that you've recently worked with that you help them to reframe maybe the societal or how they grew up? Because I know dealing with so many different people, right? It's our society, it's what we grew up with. We have notions about things that make us feel depressed or not worthy, or the limiting beliefs. How do you reframe those kinds of people in your work?
Mm. I think one great story is I had a client who came to me, was a preschool teacher, and during our sessions together, it came out that he was actually robbing people at gunpoint in order to feed him and his little brother. Um, and as we connected the dots, he began to realize that part of why he believed that this was appropriate was because of the environment that he was brought up in. And as we did our work together, he even began to connect the dots and realize that he was actually transferring his trauma onto everyone that he interacted with, including the people that he was holding at gunpoint. That's how he actually felt in his own life, that there was so much pressure to just survive. And that's exactly the same that he was doing onto others. Even his personal relationships, he began to notice patterns that his previous relationships, those partners did not necessarily get into relationships again after him because his trauma had been transferred onto them as well. Once we began to rewire these beliefs and really make action steps towards moving towards a life that he preferred and really an ideal life that he wanted to live, he was able to put aside how he was treated, work through that. And today he has been promoted to that same, as assistant director of that same school.
Oh
And in his,
my God.
yes, and in his free time, instead of robbing people at gunpoint, he coaches middle school basketball in order to guide youth in a way that he never was.
That's an incredible story. That is amazing. So, Pivi, can you take us through the process then of reframing? What are some of the steps you help? You talked about, um, the drugs, not drugs, but the psilocybin or whatever that you incorporate into this kind of work now. What are you finding to be, interesting about that, or different in the typical psychology, if you will?
I think psilocybin can help in many ways. Essentially, what that allows us to do is it gives us access to all the unconscious material and then be able to go over and really dig through what was going on and create action plans moving forward. Now, psilocybin is not necessary in order to rewire limiting beliefs. So we as human beings, we have these perceptions or experiences in life. Those experiences create these perceptions that we apply to those experiences. These perceptions then create our belief systems that link thoughts and emotions together. And this then moves us into creating action unconsciously. It shows up in our life in ways that we're not aware. This is the personality in many ways. But what we can do is go back to that original experience, rewire the belief system that spawned out of the perception we applied it to, and then attach a new thought and a new feeling and create action plan on how to move that forward by building a credit system with yourself where you begin to start showing up consciously on purpose with purpose.
Wow, I love that. But isn't that like EMR, or I'm not sure how you say it, but is it EMR, or where you go back into a time and then you kind of reframe it so that somebody was afraid of snakes or they're afraid of flying. That kind of work where it's like maybe there was turbulence, so now they never want to fly again. But to go back into that, like you're just saying, that consciousness and rewire that so that they feel freer. Everybody wants to feel freer in their life, to not have those limiting beliefs so they can live their best life.
Yes, absolutely. So that's just it. So much of it is the stories that we tell ourselves. But how often do we really ask ourselves, so I feel challenged in this particular moment. I feel triggered.
Yeah.
Why is that? What am I learning about myself in this process? What is the universe trying to teach me? Because everything can be an opportunity for growth, but so often we believe like, oh no, because I was a victim of abuse, now I am a victim of life. And that's just not true. That's a story that we begin to tell ourselves. So if I can share a story on the topic of stories, I recently did a liver detox. And that the first 2 days, you have to completely fast. And then after the second 5 days, it's 7 days long, second 5 days, you can begin to add a little bit of food. But that first day, I noticed that towards the end of the day, I began to feel agitated. And I was like, why do I feel so agitated right now? And it occurred to me, well, so one of my core values, along with peace and growth, is freedom. And I felt because I was restricting myself from having food, it was infringing upon my core value of freedom. And when I really thought about it, I was like, but if reason this is infringing upon it is because I don't feel free. And the reason I don't feel free is because true freedom for me was discipline. That if I can't control myself, if I can't control my moods and my urges, when I restrict myself in certain ways, am I truly free? And so this that was not the lesson I was expecting to learn on day one of a liver detox, but instead of telling myself I am agitated, or even that I feel agitation, I began to ask myself, so what about this is agitating me? And what am I learning about myself? And that question really began to get to the root of it. What I was learning about myself was that I really value freedom to a point where I realized discipline does equate to freedom for me.
Well, doesn't that go back to your original story of running away from home and how education and doing that was part of your freedom?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That going against the grain was, in fact, it became my identity to some degree. That going against the grain was like, no, I'm different. And this is what freedom actually means.
God, it's so fascinating. What are the things, if you can explain to people, that kind of led you to this? I know when we met, you were working in a preschool, like you've done so many things, the blockchain, the everything. What has brought you the greatest joy? What, like on your journey, what path do you feel took you to where you are today? Because what we try to explain is there's not one linear way, people, right? We all have different ways of getting to on our hero's journey, if you will. And you certainly are on one. Where you slay dragons where others don't, doors will open for ones that don't open for others. And you're a perfect example of that. What do you feel has led you to your purpose?
Okay, so I would like to differentiate. So, purpose, if we could define that for a minute, I think purpose is like your passion, your skills, and your service to others kind of rolled, combined into one. And that your passions are for yourself, but your purpose is for others. And while I was skillful at blockchain and even passionate about it, it wasn't making me feel fulfilled to any degree at that time in my life. Ultimately, what led me to the preschool was that I was doing a lot of AI research, especially surrounding blockchain, and it occurred to me that we weren't getting many projects completed in that time. And part of that was because the only communication that was going on within the department was yelling at a computer screen when a code wasn't working. And it was then that I realized, well, how are we trying to figure out artificial intelligence when we haven't figured out real intelligence? And that's what led me to the preschool. I was like, you know what? I'm going to raise the next generation more consciously. And I'm so glad that I did that, because what I learned was that little kids are wise. They're extremely wise. They ask these profound questions like, why is the earth round? Why is grass green? What are stars? And these are fascinating questions. Whereas if you go into a 12th grade class, all this wonder has disappeared and something has happened between kindergarten and 12th grade, and it's not just puberty.
So true. That is so interesting. And so, PV, what now in your life do you hope to bring forth as, let's say, your legacy of all the wonderful things you've experienced and are doing? What is it that you'd really want people to know and change, and for better, to change in their lives, to make their lives better?
So if I would just finish up that story, so part of what I learned at that preschool was that teaching kids was perhaps part of the problem. In fact, I learned so much from the kids that I learned to be curious. And what ended up happening was that teachers around me started asking me for advice. And instead of giving them advice, I just asked them questions the way kids ask me questions. And that ultimately led to coaching. I realized that I was guiding them. And so that ultimately led to coaching, and I paired that with a few teachings of my own. And that led to partnerships, which then led to talks, and now I have my own private practice. So part of, I suppose, what I would like to have, or what I would share with the world from my own learnings, is to be curious. Ask yourself, like, why are you really doing what you're doing? And down to not just things in life like your job, but also your own behaviors, even your thoughts and your feelings. Why am I feeling this way? Why do I think this? Be curious about yourself. And another thing is, sit in silence. You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. See, if when you sit in silence, what do you hear? Is it the endless chatter in your mind, or is it a deeper guidance?
And there is a difference. You bring up a really good point on that. How does one get to that point where it's not just, oh, I got to do the laundry, oh, I didn't pick up the cleaning, oh, I did this, or I did that, to the point where we start to really hear our inner wisdom and be able to act from that? What does it take? You've done that work. What does it take to get to that place in your mind?
Curiosity is definitely one of those things, but I remember one of the first meditations that I did. I sat down and I was like, okay, the goal is to stop thinking. And I'm sitting there, and all I hear in my mind is, oh, I gotta do dishes, I gotta do laundry, I gotta pay bills. Oh, and remember that one time this extremely traumatic thing happened to you as a child? Oh, and I gotta do homework, and I gotta take the dog out. Oh, and remember that same memory? Like, it kept coming up. And when I noticed that it was that same memory coming up between task-oriented thoughts, I really focused in on it. I gave it the attention that it was asking for. That there was a part of me that was like, focus. There's something here that is really, it's like a thorn in your side. And when I really focused in, I essentially told myself and talked myself through that process of, this is why you left. You're safe now. Everything is okay. And it was for that particular memory, that's all it took. Observing it changed my behavior.
Mm.
That giving it the attention, accepting that as a part of my conscious experience, rather than suppressing it and be like, no, I don't want to think about it. I said that's the thing. You're gonna think about it. It's gonna come up unconsciously then. And then that memory never came up again. But others did. And I did the same with the others. And eventually it came to a point where there was this stillness that began to cultivate inside. I also paired that with breath work. that in moments where I began to feel extremely anxious, one of the best ways to gain control over anxiety is to gain control over your breath. And so box breathing is a great tool. It's quick. It just snaps, it interrupts that signal. And so you inhale for a count of 4, hold for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 4, hold for a count of 4. I would just do that 10 times in moments that I felt distressed. And then eventually what I noticed was, instead of chatter and all these thoughts in my mind, there was almost as if there was a deeper voice that kind of came from down here. It wasn't from in my head. And it gave me guidance. In times where fear would arise, that guidance would say, don't be afraid, PV, have faith in your abilities.
Wow. And that's that inner wisdom voice that we want to get to.
Yes.
That's what makes you a miracle worker. No, it's true.
Thank you, Deborah.
It's true. You are. You're a miracle worker. And where are you now in your life? What are the things that you want to impart or share with our audience today, and also how they could reach out to you? But what is it now moving forward? Do you feel, as I said before, leaving a legacy?
I think part of my legacy would be to have people access peace. It's not that we really lose our connection to the divine or source or ourselves. It's just that we lose sight of it. The connection is always there. And to clear up all of the muck and dirt and dust that has accumulated for you to see that connection again. And that's part of what I've been doing with my consciousness coaching, to help people really understand who they truly are, which I think is separate from the personality that begins to accumulate through the experiences that we have. Behind that personality is still this pure consciousness that is ever present, and that's who you truly are. If anyone wants to find me, I think you could just type Palveshey into Google. You can find me at palveshey.com, Palveshey on Instagram, Palveshey on Twitter, Palveshey on LinkedIn and Facebook, Palveto on Spotify.
Everywhere.
Yeah, just my first name.
That's great that you got all those handles like that. That's perfect.
You can thank my mom for giving me that name.
I love that name. Does it mean something?
Sunshine.
Oh, that's perfect for you. Because that's what you do. You spread sunshine and light wherever you go. So I highly recommend to anybody who's listening to this today to please check Palveshey out, to get her help if you are feeling that there's something more out there for you in the world, that you don't really know how to access it. And I thank you so much for coming on today and sharing the wisdom and the knowledge that you have in this field, and just keep doing all the great work that you're doing. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Deborah. If I may add something, just that, well, if you may feel that there's something out there, just remember it's not out there, it's in here. You have to go within yourself to go beyond yourself.